Vin Diesel's hand gripped the door handle to his own restaurant. It was late, and the restaurant was quieter than usual. He had just finished a long day of filming and wanted to enjoy a peaceful dinner without anyone noticing him. As he walked in, the dim lighting made the place feel warm and inviting, like a familiar home. He moved toward the back, where the kitchen's smells of sizzling food always managed to lift his mood. But suddenly, he froze. The sound of muffled sobs cut through the air. The soft cry of someone in distress stopped him dead in his tracks. He turned his head slowly, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was coming from the kitchen area. As he walked closer, the sobs grew louder. His heart began to race. He had never heard anything like this before in his own restaurant. The familiar smell of grilled meat and fresh bread couldn't cover up the tension that was starting to build. The cry echoed louder, more desperate. And then he saw her. One of the young servers, a girl named Maria, was sitting at a corner table, her hands covering her face as she wept. Her apron was slightly askew, as if she hadn't even noticed. The other employees moved around the kitchen, but no one seemed to acknowledge the sobs. It was as if they were pretending not to hear. Vin Diesel's heart dropped. This wasn't just any crying. It was the kind of cry that made you feel like something was deeply wrong. Something was off, and Vin wasn't sure if he was prepared for what he was about to hear. Without thinking, he walked toward her, his mind racing, his thoughts jumbled. He had built this restaurant as a safe haven for people, a place to relax and enjoy good food. He never thought something like this would happen here. Maria didn't notice him approaching until he was right beside her. When she saw him, her eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly wiped her tears away. "Mr. Diesel, I didn't know you were here," she stammered, standing up immediately, her face flushed with embarrassment. Vin gently put a hand on her shoulder, stopping her from moving. "Maria, what's going on? Why are you crying?" She hesitated for a long moment, looking around at the staff who were pretending to be busy. Her eyes darted from side to side, as if searching for the right words, but nothing came. Finally, she spoke in a soft, trembling voice. It's nothing. Don't worry about me." But Vin couldn't let it go. He could see the pain in her eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Maria," he said again, more softly this time. "Tell me what happened. I need to know. You don't have to go through this alone." At that moment, one of the other servers, a tall man named Greg, walked past them. Vin saw the way Greg looked at Maria, the way his eyes flicked over her with a strange coldness. Vin's gut twisted, but he held back his words. Maria wasn't done speaking yet. Maria let out a shaky breath. "It's the customers. Some of them, they've been making racist comments to me. I don't know how to handle it anymore. Every time I try to serve them, they say things to make me feel small. I don't want to lose my job, but I can't take it. It's getting worse, Mr. Diesel." Vin Diesel's heart froze. He had heard about incidents like this happening in restaurants before, but he never thought it would happen in his own place. His mind spun, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. How could anyone treat another person like this? Especially in a place he had worked so hard to create, a place meant for everyone to feel welcome, regardless of who they were. Before he could speak, Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want to cause trouble, but it's just too much." Vin's expression hardened. He was angry now, angry at what was happening to his employees, angry at the people who thought they could get away with this kind of behavior. But what could he do about it? Then, without warning, the door to the kitchen swung open, and in walked another customer, one who was clearly intoxicated. He stumbled toward the counter, laughing loudly and slurring his words. Without hesitation, he shot a nasty look in Maria's direction. "What are you doing here? Get me a drink. You people shouldn't even be working in places like this." Maria flinched, her face paling as she stood frozen in place. The words hit her like a slap in the face, and she barely managed to hold back her tears. Vin Diesel's jaw clenched so hard, his teeth almost ached. This was too much. Maria took a step back, visibly trying to keep herself together, but the hurt in her eyes was undeniable. That's when Vin knew he couldn't just stand by anymore. He had to do something. The customer didn't notice the silent fury in Vin's gaze as he walked over to him. Vin's steps were deliberate, his body stiff with anger. The customer barely had time to react before Vin stood right in front of him. Vin's voice was low but firm. "You don't talk to my employees like that." The man blinked, too drunk to fully understand what was happening. "What? Who the hell do you think you are?" "I'm the owner of this place," Vin said calmly, but his eyes were full of fire. "And if I ever hear you speak to anyone here like that again, you're out. Understand?" The man laughed, clearly thinking Vin was bluffing. But Vin didn't budge. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. This wasn't about a threat. This was about making sure everyone in this restaurant knew that disrespect of any kind wouldn't be tolerated. The drunk man's smile faded as he saw the seriousness in Vin's eyes. For a moment, there was only silence, heavy and thick, as everyone in the restaurant waited for something to happen. Then, just as the man opened his mouth to say something, the door to the kitchen swung open again. A different server. The young man named Zach walked through, and in his hand was something that made Vin's blood run cold. It was a phone. And on that phone, a video was playing. A video of Maria. A video of her being insulted by that same customer earlier in the evening. Only this time it was worse. Far worse. Maria's face went white as she saw the video. Zach looked at Vin and said, "They've been recording her every time she gets yelled at. They've been sending it around." Vin felt a hot wave of fury rise within him. This wasn't just racism. It was harassment. And now it was personal. "What are you going to do about this?" Zach asked, his voice shaky. Vin didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the man who had made the cruel comments. "Get out of my restaurant now." But the man wasn't finished yet. "I know who you are," the customer sneered. "You think you can just push me around because you're famous? You're nothing but a—" Vin didn't let him finish. He grabbed the man by the collar, lifting him off the ground, and in that moment, the entire restaurant fell silent. The weight of what was about to happen hung in the air. But what came next shocked everyone, including Vin. The phone in Zach's hand buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't just another video. It was a message that made Vin Diesel's blood run cold, and it was about to change everything. Vin Diesel's grip on the man's collar tightened as he looked down at the phone Zach was holding. The message that appeared on the screen felt like a punch to the gut. It was from an unknown number, and the words it contained were chilling. "We have footage of you, too. You're next. Watch your back." Vin felt a cold sweat forming on the back of his neck. The tension in the restaurant was palpable, and it wasn't just the man he was holding up now. Everyone in the room had turned their eyes to him. Every eye was watching, waiting to see what he would do next. The man in his grip started to squirm, but Vin wasn't focused on him anymore. He was focused on the message. Whoever had sent it knew things they shouldn't have. They knew about his involvement in the restaurant, about his reputation, about his every move. It was clear this wasn't just about Maria or the other employees. It was about him now. The drunk customer's eyes darted between Vin and the phone. "What? What is that? What do you mean, you're next?" he asked, his voice shaking. Vin let the man drop back to his feet, his anger simmering just below the surface. The customer staggered, clearly disoriented, but that was the least of Vin's worries. He turned to face the rest of the room, locking eyes with the staff. "Whoever did this, I need to know now. I'm not asking again." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they should speak up or stay quiet. Maria, standing off to the side, was still trembling, but she finally took a step forward, her voice quiet but determined. "It's the regulars," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've been coming in for months now. At first it was just small things, offhand comments, slurs here and there. But then it got worse. They started to make videos taking pictures of me when I wasn't looking. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't think anyone would believe me." Vin's heart sank as he listened to Maria's confession. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had always prided himself on creating a welcoming space for everyone. How could something like this be happening right under his nose, in his own restaurant? Before he could respond, Zach stepped forward, still holding the phone. "Vin, there's more," he said, his voice shaky. "There's a whole group of them. They've been sending videos of Maria around to people, and they're not just insulting her, they're threatening her, telling her to know her place." Vin's fists clenched. He could feel the anger rising again, threatening to boil over. How could anyone think they had the right to treat someone like that? But just as he was about to speak, the door swung open again. This time, it wasn't a customer. It was a man in a suit, someone who looked official. He wasn't a regular here, and the way he walked into the room immediately caught everyone's attention. He didn't introduce himself, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made everyone stop and pay attention. His sharp gaze swept over the room before landing on Vin. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Diesel," the man said in a deep, calm voice, "but I think we need to have a conversation." Vin looked at the man, his instincts telling him that something wasn't right. This wasn't just a random person showing up. He had a feeling this was connected to everything happening tonight. The man in the suit pulled out a folder from under his arm, setting it down on one of the nearby tables. "I'm with a private firm. We've been investigating the situation at this restaurant for a while now," he said, his tone cold and businesslike. "It's not just a few rude customers. There's a much bigger operation at play here." Vin's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice sharp. The man opened the folder and laid out a series of documents and photos. "We've traced the videos, the messages. They're all coming from a network of people who have been targeting your restaurant for months. They've been organizing attacks, small at first, but they've been escalating. It's not just harassment. It's a coordinated effort to ruin your reputation, your business, and to push their racist agenda. This is bigger than you realize, Mr. Diesel." Vin's heart skipped a beat. The weight of the situation hit him harder than ever. It wasn't just about Maria anymore. It wasn't just about a few bad cusses, tomers. This was an attack on everything he stood for, everything he had worked so hard to build. "I don't care who they are or what they think they can do," Vin said, his voice full of determination. "I'm not letting anyone ruin my restaurant, my people, or this business." "What's the next step?" The man in the suit didn't flinch. He was used to this kind of reaction, Vin could tell. "We need to get ahead of this before it gets worse," he said, his voice now a bit more urgent. "You're being targeted by a group of individuals with a very specific agenda. They've been hiding in plain sight, but they've gotten bold. They're using your own success against you." Vin felt a cold chill run down his spine. His mind raced, trying to process everything that was happening. These people were not just customers. They were part of something larger, something far more dangerous. And now they had made it personal. But just as the man in the suit was about to explain more, the door swung open again. This time, it wasn't another customer, but someone who had been in the background all night. Greg, the other server who had been acting strange earlier. Greg didn't look like his usual self. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with panic. "Mr. Diesel, you need to see this," he said, his voice shaking. Vin's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to face Greg. "What now?" Greg quickly pulled out his phone and showed Vin the screen. It was another video, but this one was different. The camera zoomed in on Maria, sitting at one of the tables, quietly serving a group of customers. But in the background, a man was seen slipping something into her purse when she wasn't looking. It was a small piece of paper, a note. The camera zoomed in on the note as the man walked away. It was clear enough to read. "Get out while you can. You're being watched. They won't protect you forever." Vin's chest tightened as he read the message. He had a sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. "Who did this?" Vin demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Greg shook his head. "I don't know, but I think they know everything about us, everything about this place." Vin stood in stunned silence. His mind was spinning. Who were these people? And why had they targeted Maria so relentlessly? And more importantly, what were they planning next? Vin Diesel's mind raced as he stared at the note on Greg's phone. The words seemed to burn themselves into his memory, and for the first time that night, he could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. His restaurant, his employees, everything he had worked so hard to build. Everything was now under threat. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This was no longer just about harassment or a few rude customers. This was something far darker. Whoever was behind this had a clear agenda, and they weren't going to stop until they had torn everything apart. He turned to Greg, his voice low but determined. "I need to know everything. Who sent you that video? Who's behind this?" Greg hesitated, glancing around the room at the other staff. But there was no turning back now. Greg knew too much, and he knew that staying silent wasn't an option. "I'm not sure, but I've been hearing things," Greg said, his voice strained. "Whispers, rumors. People talk when they think no one's listening. I think it's bigger than we realize. They've got eyes everywhere, and they've been planning this for months." Vin's blood ran cold. Eyes everywhere. This wasn't just some isolated group of troublemakers. This was an organized effort, and it was clear that someone, possibly many people, had been working behind the scenes to undermine everything he stood for. "Tell me everything you know," Vin insisted. Greg swallowed hard before continuing. "I think they've been targeting other restaurants, too. They've been sending these racist messages to servers, telling them to stay in their place. It's like they're trying to create fear, make everyone feel powerless. But I don't know who they are, Mr. Diesel. I've heard that they have connections that go higher than any of us realize." Maria, who had been standing quietly off to the side, stepped forward again. Her voice was trembling, but there was a newfound strength in her eyes. "I didn't want to cause trouble, but I've seen something too. The regulars who've been making these comments, they've been coming in here for weeks, but they've also been talking to other people in the neighborhood. There's talk of a group, a secret group that's been trying to influence businesses. They don't just want to hurt people, they want to take control." Vin took in the gravity of what Maria was saying. This wasn't just a few angry customers venting their frustrations. This was a coordinated, malicious attack. And worse, it was happening right under his nose, in his own place of business. But as he absorbed the information, a thought began to form in the back of his mind. If these people were so organized, so determined to tear everything apart, then maybe it wasn't just about destroying his restaurant. Maybe it was about something more. Vin's jaw clenched, his thoughts racing. He needed to get ahead of this. He needed to protect Maria and the rest of the staff, but he also needed to send a message that would make it clear that no one would be allowed to take control of his life, his business, or his employees. "I'm not backing down," Vin said firmly, looking around the room at the group of employees who had gathered around him. "We're going to fight back. I don't care who they are or what they think they can do to us. This place, this family, is under my protection, and we're not going to let anyone take that away from us." There was a pause, and then, one by one, the employees nodded. Maria's eyes shone with gratitude, while Greg looked at Vin with a mixture of respect and relief. For the first time that night, they weren't just standing around in fear. They were standing together, ready to face whatever was coming. Vin turned to the man in the suit, the one who had shown up earlier with the disturbing information. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice steady but urgent. The man in the suit looked at him, his expression unreadable. We need to go public. We need to expose them. If we let this continue to fester in the shadows, it will only get worse. The people behind this, whoever they are, they're hiding because they know they can operate in the dark. But if we bring it into the light, if we make it known, they'll have nowhere to run. Vin nodded. Let's do it. Let's take this to the media. Let the world know what's been going on. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be backlash, there would be resistance, and there would be people who tried to tear them down. But Vin didn't care. He was done being silent, done letting these people believe they could control him and his business. It was time for a fight. As the group made their plans, Maria spoke up, her voice trembling but strong. Mr. Diesel, thank you. I don't know how to repay you for standing up for us. I've never felt this supported before. Vin smiled, his gaze softening. You don't have to repay me, Maria. We're a family here, and families take care of each other. The staff began to rally together, working in unison to prepare for the next step. They would contact the media, bring the evidence to light, and ensure that no one could silence them again. And as they did, Vin Diesel knew that this battle was only the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road he was ready to walk. Later that night, Vin sat alone in his office, looking out the window. His thoughts were heavy, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He had seen the worst of humanity that day. People who thought they could tear others down because of their race, their background, their differences. But in the face of it all, he had seen something more important. He had seen people standing together, people refusing to be silenced, people fighting for what was right. And as he looked at the bustling kitchen and the staff working late into the night, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a fight for his restaurant. It was a fight for the dignity of every person who walked through those doors. A fight for respect, for equality, and for justice. Vin Diesel may have started this night hoping for a quiet dinner, but he had ended it as something much more important. Someone who would not back down in the face of hate. Someone who would protect those who needed him most. And with that, he knew this story wasn't over. It was just beginning.